They thought I was weak. They were wrong. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. You've always been the weak one, Tessa, Brent said, smiling across the courthouse table. So stop pretending you can do anything about this. He said it 2 seconds before Mr. Keene opened the folder and slid the signature comparison into the light. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt tired. Bone tired, grief tired. The kind of tired that comes after months of watching somebody die by inches. By then I had been sleeping in a borrowed room above Nora's garage for 11 nights, wearing the same black flats to meetings, and carrying copies of records in a grocery tote like they were groceries instead of proof my family had lied to my face. People like Brent always mistook exhaustion for weakness. I'm 31, and I worked as a home health aide for most of my adult life. It's the kind of job people thank you for softly and then look straight through, like care work doesn't count unless it happens in a hospital. I knew how to rotate a patient without hurting their hips, how to read pain before it fully hit, how to keep a medication log when the night bled into morning. I also knew how to stay quiet when louder people wanted the room. That last skill almost ruined me. When my grandmother got sick for good, everybody had a reason they couldn't stay. Brent had clients. Aunt Carla had her nerves. The cousins who posted crying emojis online had school pickups and retreats, and whatever excuse sounded respectable that week. I moved into Grandma's back bedroom with 2 duffel bags and started sleeping in 90-minute pieces, because somebody had to make sure she ate, took her pills, and didn't wander toward the front door at 3 a.m., asking for her sister, who had been dead for decades. After she died, they called me emotional, then unstable, then inconvenient. What I stood to lose wasn't just the house, though that house mattered. It was the last place where I had been seen clearly. It was Grandma tapping my wrist and saying, "Quiet isn't empty, baby. Quiet notices." If I stayed silent, Brent and Carla would sell it fast, bury the paperwork, and turn me into the bitter relative grief had made irrational. And for one whole day, I almost let them. Then Mr. Keene turned the page, Brent's smile shifted, and the room changed. Before Grandma got sick, my role in the family was already set. I was the one people handed things to. The one who arrived early, stacked folding chairs, remembered who took decaf, and disappeared before anybody had to thank me. Brent was the one who shook hands too hard and talked like every room was his. Aunt Carla floated in behind him in linen and perfume, smoothing over his rudeness with phrases like, "You know how direct he is," as if cruelty were just another style of communication. When Grandma's lungs got worse that winter, the family performed concern publicly, briefly, and mostly for themselves. Carla came the first Sunday with soup from an expensive deli and a list of suggestions she did not plan to carry out. Brent stood in the kitchen, looked at the pill organizer I'd filled, and said, "There has to be a more professional setup than this." I said, "This is what hospice recommended." He leaned against the counter and smiled without warmth. "Right. I forgot you're the expert now." That was how it went. I kept the chart on the fridge: blood pressure, appetite, oxygen level, pain scale. I washed sheets at 2 in the morning after accidents. I learned which pharmacy tech would refill her nebulizer solution without making me explain the insurance problem from the top. I cut chicken into pieces so small her hands wouldn't shake trying to hold the fork. I rubbed lotion into her feet while Carla texted from some luncheon, asking if Grandma was comfortable today, as if comfort were a yes or no box instead of 10,000 tiny decisions. When the checking account ran low because Grandma's oxygen wasn't fully covered, I used my own rent money and told nobody. When Brent stopped by, he brought pastries, kissed Grandma's forehead, and said loudly, "We're all pitching in, Tess," even though he hadn't paid for a thing I could trace. Grandma saw more than they realized. One night, after I settled her under the quilt, she caught my hand with strength. "They'll praise the flowers and forget the water," she whispered. I smiled because I thought she was confused. "Try to sleep." "No. Listen, the loud ones always think the quiet ones don't keep count." I should have asked what she meant. By the time I understood, I was already locked out of her front door. The funeral was on a Thursday under a pale sky. People kept saying Grandma had gone peacefully, which told me exactly who had not been there. There is nothing peaceful about the body losing ground. There is panic, and there is the practical work of keeping someone clean while they apologize for needing help. I stood near the casket in shoes that pinched and accepted casseroles from women who had not called once in 6 months. Brent gave a eulogy heavy on words like legacy and dignity. He cried in exactly the right places. Aunt Carla dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Afterward, I heard her tell someone from church. Tessa was sweet to help at the end. We all did what we could. Sweet. Like I had dropped off muffins. I stayed late after the burial because there were real things to do. Collect the framed photos, carry the guest book, make sure the funeral home returned Grandma's rosary. By the time I got back to the house, dusk had settled. My key didn't work. At first I thought I was too tired to turn it right. Then I saw fresh scratches on the brass plate. New lock. I called Brent. Straight to voicemail. I called Carla. Oh, she said, in the tone people use when pretending a decision was mutual. Brent had the locks changed this afternoon. Just temporarily. For security. My clothes are inside. We packed some things for you. Pack them where? A pause. In the garage. Pressed the phone so hard to my ear it hurt. You changed the locks on me the day we buried her? Tessa, don't do this dramatically. Probate can get messy, and we need order. Order, I repeated. She lowered her voice. You've been under strain. It may be healthier if you step back. There were 2 trash bags in the garage. My jeans, work scrubs, toiletries, and the cheap kettle I kept in Grandma's room. The folder where I stored her medication charts was missing. So was the accordion file with utility bills and bank envelopes I had been sorting. As I dragged the bags to my car, Mrs. Alvarez called softly, "Honey?" I looked up. She stood on her porch in a cardigan, watching me carefully. "I saw them here last night," she said. "Around midnight. Carrying boxes out the side door." That was when grief made room for suspicion. 2 days later, Carla insisted we meet at Lenny's diner to discuss next steps as a family, which sounded warm until I arrived and realized she had chosen a booth in the center of the room where half the town could see us. Brent sat with one arm across the vinyl backrest like he owned the place. Carla had a legal pad and the expression she wore whenever she wanted to appear reasonable while cutting somebody open. I came straight from a double shift. Brent glanced at the dark circles under my eyes and smiled. "You look rough, Tess." Carla gave him a little glance that meant continue. "We're worried about you," she said. "You've been so immersed in caring for Grandma," I said. "In isolation," Brent corrected. "That's not the same thing." The waitress poured coffee and retreated fast. Carla opened her pad. "We've spoken to a realtor. The market is good, and holding the house during probate is irresponsible." "Nothing has cleared probate yet," I said. "You can't just list it." Brent laughed, not loudly, but loud enough. "There it is. A legal opinion from a home aide." "Health aide," I said. "Exactly." A couple in the next booth went quiet. I kept my voice even. "Where are Grandma's files?" Carla folded her hands. "Safe." "Where?" "With the documents that matter." That landed the way she intended. Like I didn't know the difference between grief and paperwork. Brent leaned forward and lowered his voice to the fake, gentle register he used with people he considered stupid. "You took care of her. That was kind. But kindness doesn't make you executor material." I felt my jaw lock. "Who said anything about executor?" His eyes flicked to Carla so quickly most people would have missed it. I didn't. Then the bell over the diner door rang, and a man in a county blazer stepped inside, holding a large envelope. He scanned the room, saw Brent, and walked over. "Brent Holloway?" "Yes." "You've been served." He took the envelope with 2 fingers, irritation first, then something uglier. Carla's smile vanished. "What is it?" I asked. Brent shoved the papers face down. "None of your business." But I had already seen enough. "County seal. Case number." And one phrase turned my stomach cold. "Petition to prevent unlawful transfer." That night I sat in Nora's garage apartment with one lamp on and Grandma's old cardigan wrapped around me. The apartment had slanted ceilings, a hot plate, and a mattress on a metal frame that creaked every time I rolled over. Nora had cleared it out for me in less than an hour after she found me in her driveway, trying not to cry over 2 trash bags and a laundry basket. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, handing me a chipped mug of tea. "No speeches. Just stay." People think help has to be dramatic to count. Sometimes it's a key, a blanket, and somebody not asking you to explain your pain in order. Still, being safe did not feel like being okay. I kept replaying the diner. Brent getting served. Carla's face hardening. The words, unlawful transfer. The missing files. Every thread led back to the same question. What were they rushing? I should tell you this clearly. I did not want a war. I wanted sleep. I wanted my grandmother back. I wanted one adult in that family to say, Tessa, what they did was cruel, and we won't let it stand. Instead, my phone filled with messages from relatives who had not lifted a finger during hospice, but suddenly had opinions about Harmony. Carla texted first. Please don't inflame things. Then Brent. Stay out of matters you don't understand. Then a cousin in Ohio I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Heard you're making this harder than it has to be. Harder than what? Being erased politely? Around midnight, I opened my banking app and stared at the balance. $219 until payday. My supervisor had already cut one of my regular overnight shifts because I'd missed too much during Grandma's final week. For 10 full minutes, I considered blocking them all, walking away, and letting the house become their problem. Maybe survival meant knowing when not to fight. Then I reached into the side pocket of one trash bag, looking for clean socks, and my fingers hit something metal. It was a small brass key on Grandma's old pharmacy reward tag. Taped to the back in her shaky handwriting were 4 words, for Tessa, if needed. The handwriting on that tag told me Grandma had expected trouble. I stared at the key, so long the numbers on the pharmacy tag blurred. Grandma's handwriting had changed in the last month. Thinner, shakier, letters leaning as if even ink required more effort, but it was hers. I would have known that looped T anywhere. Nora came up the narrow stairs, took one look at my face, and said, "What happened?" I held up the key. This was in my bag. She turned it over carefully. "Storage unit," she wrote, "for Tessa, if needed." Nora did not react with a movie gasp. She pulled out a chair and said, "Start at the beginning." Slowly. So I did. The lock change. The missing files. The petition language on the envelope at the diner. Mrs. Alvarez seeing boxes hauled out the side door at midnight. Nora listened without interrupting, stopping me only to pin down dates. When did Brent first mention selling the house? Before the funeral. Offhand. He said the market was finally doing us a favor. And Carla? After Grandma's second hospital discharge. She asked if the deed was simple. I thought she meant inheritance. Nora nodded once. People tell on themselves when they assume you're not tracking context. The next morning, before my shift, I drove to the storage place 3 towns over because the tag had the company initials stamped into the back. Rows of corrugated metal doors shimmered in the heat. The office clerk checked the key number, glanced at his screen, then looked at me with sudden caution. Unit 118, he said. Secondary access only. Secondary to who? He hesitated, then slid the clipboard toward me. Sign in. On the line above mine, in blue ink dated 6 days before Grandma died, was Brent's name. Inside Unit 118 were 6 bankers' boxes, Grandma's Cedar Hope chest, and a locked gray cash bag with Aunt Carla's initials on the tag. Even standing still, I had the dizzy feeling of stepping into a room after hearing people talk about you through the door. Nora was right. This wasn't grief talking anymore, and that changed everything. I did not open everything at once. That is the version of myself Brent expected. Frantic, messy, too emotional to think in sequence. Instead, I took pictures of the unit from the doorway, each numbered box, the sign-in sheet, and the cash bag. Then I called Nora. "Don't touch the cash bag yet," she said. "Start with anything clearly labeled." Box 1 held photo albums and old Christmas linens, almost insulting in their innocence. Box 2 was utility statements, property tax bills, and homeowner's insurance paperwork. Box 3 made my skin go cold. It was Grandma's medical folder, or parts of it. My medication charts were gone, but tucked between discharge summaries and hospice notes was a yellow legal pad in Carla's handwriting listing dates and times Brent visited the house during the last 6 weeks. Only I knew those dates were wrong. On March 3rd, Carla wrote, Brent met with contractor at house, 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. on March 3rd, Brent had posted a selfie from a steakhouse 40 miles away. I remembered because Grandma had been struggling to breathe that afternoon, and his text, "Can't make it, tied up," had made me cry in the pantry where she couldn't hear. Box 4 contained bank envelopes. Not Grandma's normal checking account, which I knew by heart, but notices from a second bank in the next county. One referenced a home equity line. I sat back on my heels, reading the property address twice because my brain refused to accept it. Grandma's house had been put against debt. I copied account numbers, due dates, amounts. 12,000 overdue on one line. 48,000 drawn on another. The clerk remembered Brent because he had complained about dust and demanded climate-controlled treatment for family property. He remembered Carla too. Both had accessed the unit after Grandma's death and before the locks changed. After my shift, I went to the courthouse records room in Scrubs because changing clothes would have meant losing my nerve. There it was in black ink and county stamps. A power of attorney recorded 32 days before Grandma died. I stared at the signature line until the page shook in my hands. The signature on that filing was Grandma's name, but not hers. If you've never dealt with probate or powers of attorney, here's the simple version. A power of attorney can let someone handle finances while you're alive, but it only works if it was actually signed while the person understood what they were signing. 32 days before Grandma died, on the date stamped on that document, she was in a hospital bed trying to remember whether she had already asked me to call her sister. She had not been signing complex financial forms. Nora met me at a diner off Route 8 with her laptop and 2 highlighters. I spread copies across the table between a sugar dispenser and a plate of untouched fries. She read in silence, then pointed to the witness line. See this? Yeah. The witness is a notary from a shipping store in Brookside. Did Grandma go anywhere that week? No. She could barely get to the bathroom. Then either they brought a notary to her, which should be documented if staff were present, or somebody signed this outside her presence. I felt a rush of heat that was not anger yet. What came first was disorientation. Betrayal forces memory to split. Suddenly, every gesture gets rear-viewed. Every casserole, every hug, every time Carla smoothed Grandma's blanket and said, "We're taking care of everything," had to be reclassified. What are they doing with the line of credit? I asked. Unknown yet. But they opened it using the house as collateral. For what? That's the part they're hiding. There was more. A pharmacy printout in the storage box showed one of Grandma's sedatives refilled early twice in February. I had never picked up an early refill. The prescribing doctor had circled concern about increased confusion in one visit note. Then there was a voicemail still saved on Grandma's old landline account, retrieved through the provider because Nora knew what to request. Carla's voice saying, "Just keep her calm until Brent gets there. We only need a signature." I listened to it in Nora's car and had to put my forehead against the dashboard. By then I knew what they hid. Fake authority, debt against the house, and some transaction rushed through while Grandma was medicated. Then Nora found Brent's business name on a civil judgment docket. The judgment explained the speed, but not the motive. Brent's contracting company had been sued 18 months earlier over unfinished work and diverted funds. The case had settled, but the payment schedule on the docket looked brutal. He was already behind. There was also a tax lien against a parcel he owned with a partner. None of that proved forgery. It did mean he had pressure, a timeline, and a reason to treat Grandma's house like a lifeboat. Carla's role was harder for me to look at. Greed would have been easier. But her emails. Yes, there were emails, because Brent was arrogant enough to print some and stash them in box 5, showed something Messier. Debt panic, but also resentment. In one message she wrote, "After everything I did for your mother, that house should not go to waste on sentiment." Another, "Tessa can't maintain it, and you know she'll turn martyr if given the chance." I read that line 3 times, as if caregiving had been a performance instead of the reason Grandma had eaten, bathed, and stayed home as long as she had. Nora built a timeline on her laptop while I made labeled copies at a print shop that smelled like toner and burnt dust. February 12th, early sedative refill. February 14th, Carla email about needing signature. February 15th, notary stamp at Brookside shipping store. March 3rd, false visit log entry. March 9th, home equity draw. March 14th, Grandma dies. March 14th evening, boxes removed. March 15th, locks changed. When you line things up like that, lies stop looking like confusion and start looking like architecture. I backed everything up 3 ways. Paper copies in a binder, digital scans on a flash drive Nora kept, and photos uploaded to a private folder Brent did not know existed. Mr. Keen agreed to review what we had, but he warned me first. "If this is what it appears to be," he said, "exposing it will not simply embarrass your family. It may trigger court intervention." I know. "No," he said gently. "I don't think you do. Intervention freezes things. It turns private betrayal into public record. That was the moral line. Once I crossed it, there was no landing for Brent or Carla. I sat in my car outside his office for 10 minutes, holding the binder in my lap. And once I crossed that doorway, there was no quiet way back. Brent knew before I said a word. I don't know if he noticed the courthouse copy stamp on one of the papers in my bag when we crossed paths outside the probate office, or if men like him simply smell resistance. All I know is that he called me that night from a number I didn't recognize and said, "We should talk like adults." I should have hung up. Instead, I agreed to meet at Grandma's house because part of me still believed walls remember truth. He was waiting on the porch with 2 coffees and the kind of smile people wear when they've chosen charm as a weapon. The new lock gleamed under the porch light. "I got you oat milk," he said. I didn't take the cup. "What do you want?" He leaned against the railing. "To de-escalate. Carla's worried you're getting bad advice." "Nora isn't bad advice." His eyes sharpened. "So that's who's been filling your head." I said nothing. He sighed, as if I were exhausting. "Tess, you've always done this. You get hurt, then you go quiet and make everything heavier than it needs to be. You changed the locks on me after the funeral. For security. You used Grandma's house for debt." His jaw flexed once. "You don't understand the paperwork." He stepped closer and lowered his voice. The house was sitting there. Carla and I were trying to keep things afloat until probate. If we lost momentum, creditors would panic. "Your creditors?" "Family obligations," he snapped, then smoothed himself back into reason. "Nobody was trying to hurt you." I laughed once because the alternative was spitting in his face. "You threw my things in trash bags. Because you were emotional and unpredictable." I almost caved then, not because I believed him, but because he knew the exact pressure point. My fear of becoming the unstable woman they had already described to others. Then Brent said, "Grandma would hate this spectacle." And I remembered the voicemail. "Just keep her calm until Brent gets there." I took one step back. "Don't use her to manage me." He smiled without humor. "Careful, Tess. You don't want to lose what little family you have left." When I got back to Nora's, my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't fit the key into her side door. Nora opened the door and named the threat I couldn't yet admit. Mr. Keene did not like drama, which was one reason I trusted him. "Courts prefer paper to emotion," he told me, tapping the binder. "Fortunately, paper is what you have." He filed an emergency motion to pause any transfer or sale tied to the house and requested a probate conference to review the irregular documents. In plain language, that meant nobody could pretend this was a normal inheritance discussion anymore. It also meant Brent and Carla had to show up and answer questions in a room where interrupting me would not work. Still, Mr. Keene wanted one more piece if possible: confirmation from the notary or shipping store employee tied to the power of attorney. Nora found it before noon the next day. The notary log listed a signature for homebound principal, but the address field was left blank and the ID description was suspiciously generic. The employee on shift remembered Brent because he had argued over a fax fee. He did not remember any elderly woman. "Can he testify?" I asked. "If needed," Mr. Keene said. "But often the threat of testimony is enough." Carla called the evening before the conference. I almost didn't answer. Her voice came soft, maternal in that strategic way she used when she wanted to borrow innocence. "Tessa, I heard you've involved counsel." "Yes." A long exhale. "This is becoming humiliating." "For who?" "For all of us." Brent was trying to buy time. "By forging her signature?" Silence. "Then, you don't know that." "I know enough." She switched tactics instantly. "If you push, every private detail of your grandmother's decline becomes part of a case file. Her confusion, her medications, her accidents. Is that what you want?" I closed my eyes. Cruel people always assume dignity belongs to the people with the most to hide. "What I want," I said, "is for you to stop talking like protecting her means protecting you." She hung up. The next morning I sat outside the probate office with Nora and a manila folder of originals on my lap. Brent arrived first in a navy blazer, confident enough to sneer when he saw me. Carla came 10 minutes later carrying a leather tote and a face arranged into patient sorrow. Then Mr. Keene stepped out and said there was a witness. The conference room was smaller than I expected, which made it feel crueler. No dramatic courtroom. No gallery. Just a rectangular table, fluorescent lights, one clerk typing, and nowhere for anyone's face to hide. Mr. Keene sat beside me. Across from us, Brent crossed his arms like a man annoyed by delays. Carla folded her hands over her tote and projected controlled offense. The clerk marked exhibits. Mr. Keene started simply. Ms. Holloway cared for the decedent in the home for approximately 6 months. During that period, certain records disappeared, locks were changed, and a power of attorney surfaced bearing a disputed signature. He slid copies forward. We are requesting formal review before any asset movement proceeds. Brent snorted. Based on what? Vibes? Mr. Keene didn't even look at him. Based on documentation. Then the sequence began. First, the medical timeline showing Grandma's cognitive decline on the date of the alleged signing. Then the pharmacy records showing early sedative refills. Then Carla's voicemail. Just keep her calm until Brent gets there. We only need a signature. Carla went pale immediately. That proves nothing, Brent said. Could mean any signature. Mr. Keene nodded mildly. Perhaps. Then let's look at the notary issue. He placed the log copy down, followed by the employee statement from the shipping store. No elderly woman present. No home address recorded. Brent's name remembered independently. After that came the property records showing the home equity line, the payment delinquency notices, and the civil judgment against Brent's business. For the first time, Brent's confidence cracked. That has nothing to do with the house. It establishes motive, Mr. Keene said. Carla finally spoke. We were trying to preserve family assets. I turned to look at her. By using Grandma's home to cover Brent's debt, without telling her, we intended to fix it before anyone was harmed. I laughed once quietly. You locked me out with trash bags. Brent slammed a palm on the table. Because you would have ruined everything. There it was. Not grief. Not confusion. Entitlement with its tie loosened. Then Mr. Keene read Carla's email aloud. You were never supposed to matter this much, Brent said. Once official people start using words like referral and freeze, the temperature in a room changes. Brent felt it first. He pushed back from the table and started talking too fast, trying to reframe, then minimize, then blame me for misunderstanding temporary financial instruments, which sounded exactly like what a guilty man would say after watching his own receipts slide across a government table. Carla went the opposite way. She got very still. That scared me more. Stillness had always been her reset before reinvention. In the parking lot after the conference, while Brent argued in hushed bursts with his attorney, Carla touched my elbow like we were two women sharing a sad, private moment. You've made your point, she said. I moved my arm away. No, I made a record. Her expression tightened. Brent is under pressure you don't understand. And Grandma wasn't. The house sale was halted pending review. The line of credit became part of an investigation. Brent's business problems, once tucked into separate files and euphemisms, suddenly started connecting in ways his lawyer did not appear happy about. Relatives who had ignored me for months began calling with new tones, curious, cautious, offended, impressed. One cousin actually said, we had no idea it was that serious, and I nearly asked what part of being locked out after a funeral had seemed unserious. There was a cost, though. Winning doesn't spare your nervous system. I missed 2 shifts because I couldn't stop shaking long enough to drive. My supervisor told me to take the weekend and come back when I could focus. I jumped when my phone buzzed. I woke at 4 a.m., convinced I had forgotten a medication that no longer needed giving. I kept expecting Grandma to call my name from the back room of a house I still wasn't sure I'd ever enter again. Nora found me on her porch steps Sunday morning with a blanket around my shoulders and said, being right doesn't automatically feel good. I thought I'd feel stronger. She handed me coffee. Maybe this is strength. Maybe strength is doing it while feeling awful. That afternoon, Mr. Keene called with one more update. Inside the cash bag was an envelope addressed to me alone. I opened Grandma's envelope in Mr. Keene's office because suddenly I didn't trust private places with important truths. The paper inside was lined, torn from one of the yellow pads I used to keep by her chair. The writing wandered, but the message was clear. If they rush, slow them down. If they flatter, ask for paper. If they shame you, leave the room. Quiet is how we hear the lie. I cried so hard I had to press the heel of my hand against my mouth to keep from making noise. Mr. Keene pretended to look for something in a drawer. Nora rubbed my back once and let me have the dignity of not being watched too closely. The note did not magically fix anything. The investigation continued. Brent stopped calling after his attorney told him to. Carla sent one final message about prayer and broken families that I deleted without answering. But the note gave me something I had not felt since before the funeral: alignment. Grandma had seen them. She had seen me too. The months after were quieter in the real sense, not the forced silence I had lived under before. I went back to work part-time, then full-time. I started therapy because grief had calcified in strange places. I apologized when people bumped into me, hoarded receipts like survival gear, and still woke sometimes certain I had forgotten to lock a door that wasn't mine. My therapist said trauma often disguises itself as hypercompetence. I wrote that down. Legally, the house remained tied up for a while, but the fraudulent documents were stripped of force. In the end, I did not fight to keep the house at any cost. I fought for the truth of how it had nearly been taken. Once the estate settled properly, I accepted a smaller, clean share rather than chaining my future to rooms full of ghosts. Boundaries are not betrayal. I bought a used hatchback that winter and moved into a small apartment with good light and no family keys floating around outside my control. Then, on the first warm day in March, I found one more secret. It was a photograph I had never seen before. Grandma in her 20s, standing beside a truck in rolled-up sleeves, laughing straight at the camera like the person behind it had just said something outrageous. On the back she had written, "Soft girls survive hard things all the time." I keep that photo on my bookshelf now. A year has passed since the conference room, the fraud referral, the calls that came too late, and the silence that followed when people realized I had receipts instead of hysteria. Brent is no longer spoken about in the family with the easy confidence he once inspired. Carla still sends Christmas cards with Bible verses and no apology. I no longer open them. That used to make me feel cold. Now it feels like weatherproofing. What I learned is less cinematic than revenge stories usually want. Exposure doesn't heal you on contact. Truth doesn't walk into a room and turn your hands steady. Sometimes justice arrives looking like paperwork, fatigue, therapy invoices, and the deeply unglamorous act of saying no for the 50th time. But it still matters. It matters because lies grow best where people are trained to prioritize peace over accuracy. It matters because family titles can be used like crowbars if nobody challenges them. It matters because the quiet person in the room is often the only one keeping an actual record. If you're in anything remotely similar, here is the practical thing I wish someone had told me sooner. Make copies before you confront anybody. Dates first. Signatures second. Save voicemails. Photograph rooms before boxes disappear. If someone says you're overreacting, write down the exact sentence and the exact day. Memory gets attacked first in families like this.